Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am East Forest. I'm coming back to you from Boise, Idaho. We are coming into spring here. It's in that wonderful liminal space where sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's warm, sometimes it wants to snow, sometimes it's just absolutely brilliant. Today I have a podcast with Aubrey Marcus. And Aubrey Marcus is a dear brother, an amazing man, and someone with a lot of courage and just chutzpah, as you will hear from this podcast, where he gets into his adventures when he recently came back from a darkness retreat. Now, I say darkness retreat, not just like metaphorical darkness and emotional darkness, which I'm sure was part of this experience, but literal darkness, as he dove into an experience of being in complete, utter blackout black for days upon end, for the purpose of self-inquiry. And I think as you hear in this episode, he recounts how it was pretty surprising about the results and the value of it. And I'm so honored that he would come on to our show and give us a little glimpse into what it was like. So Aubrey is the CEO of a company called Onnit, which is I think he puts it, a human like optimization, wellness and health company with lots and lots of products. He also, as I hope you know, if you don't know, he heads up the Aubrey Marcus podcast, which I was on, one of the favorite episodes that I've been on. And he's got like a fit for service mastermind year-long kind of training experience that I also was part of recently in Malibu. Like they meet up, well, at least last year, they met up a few times a year for these sort of summits. And I came and did an East Forest ceremony for their last experience there, which is super beautiful. And it was a really amazing group of people. It was like the first time I'd done such a large-scale ceremony where everyone kind of knew each other, which was, they've been going through this journey for a year. And it was really cool. It was really cool how that influenced the experience. So he's an advocate of psychedelic medicine as a therapeutic source, as am I, among many other things. I wouldn't say that's the only thing he hangs his hat on by any means, and neither do I. But what's interesting about things like this darkness retreat is it's another way of exploring our inner self, another mode of self-inquiry, another form of technology, and this one that is pretty much just using your own endogenous chemicals that come forth when you do things like put yourself in the dark. So that's coming right up. I am playing at the Treefort Music Fest. It's coming very soon here in March. And I know that South by Southwest and some other festivals like Ultra in Miami have canceled. As far as I know, Treefort's moving forward. But, keep an eye on that, as am I. That's the latest I've heard from Treefort, is that they are moving forward. But regardless, if it is one of my favorite festivals of the year. It's here in Boise, Idaho. It's just an amazing list of curated emerging music. And I'll be doing 2 nights of ceremony concerts at the LED space, Friday and Saturday night at 10:30 is when that is scheduled, as well as sets for Yoga Fort, which is my partner Radha's sub-fort inside Treefort. So Yoga Fort is an amazing couple-day event that's simultaneous with Treefort during the daytime, and all the classes have music, live music. So I'll be doing a class with Radha on Sunday, where I'll be backing her up and giving her as the best music I can possibly do. The East Forest Fall Retreat, that's sort of our flagship retreat that we also offer in southern Utah in the majestic, amazing wilderness and canyons and mountains and aspen trees and wildlife and high desert wonderfulness. That's down there in Boulder, Utah. That's probably the Boulder you have not heard of. Not Boulder, Colorado, Boulder, Utah. It's 200 people in that town, but that's the best thing about it is it's a raw nature diet. That's October 1st through 4th, and we have an exciting scholarship program coming up to announce very soon, probably the beginning of April. We'll tell you more about that. But for anybody else who just wants to sign up and grab a spot because it is limited space, please do that. eastforest.org/retreat. We also have a retreat at Esalen in Big Sur, California. Esalen Institute, of course, is the wonderful, amazing natural hot spring resort on the edge of cliffs in Big Sur, California. Utterly magical. Couple spots left for that, I believe, last time I checked. That's the weekend of May 29th. And lastly, if you could please give this podcast a review. It's wonderful if you want to do a written one down there. This is on iTunes mostly, but even just scrolling down as I'm talking right now and giving it 5 stars makes a big difference. Helps motivate me, but also helps other guests say yes to coming on. And I've been asking all sorts of interesting guests to come on, and I hope you've been enjoying who we've had on. That being said, this is in the spirit of the gift. It's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy giving folks just different doorways to walk through in our own journey of self-inquiry, on our own journey of just exploring what the hell it means to be alive at this time. It's an amazing time with things like pandemics going on and upside down politics. And I won't even go through the litany and list of wild and crazy that's happening because you know it and I don't want to depress us. But it's also to say, hey, you're a brave soul. You have chosen to incarnate in a time of great transition. And because of that, you are the warrior that is needed. And we need you. We need you. With that, let's get into this wonderful conversation with my dear brother, Aubrey Marcus. So let me just give people a little bit of background. You went, correct me where I'm wrong, but you went to Germany to do a darkness retreat, which involved being in the dark, obviously, but like real darkness, no actual light of any kind.
Like complete
and people
blackness.
Like give you food.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so even like when the food comes in, no one is speaking to you and there's no light in that moment and you're alone.
That's it. So I'll set the scene.
Yourself.
So flew into Frankfurt, took a drive to Sachbenwalden, I think. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but it's a place in the Black Forest, and they have a darkness retreat center there with about 8 rooms in this house that are completely blacked out. And there's absolutely no light, not a pinprick of light, because if you do have any light, it is incredibly distracting. So like if there's any way in which there's just the slightest seam in the window or like a little beep from the smoke detector or something like that, like it will change the nature of your experience, which is that you should not be able to tell the difference between opening your eyes and closing your eyes. It's complete darkness. And that's the essential, basically engineering technology that's required to do this. Now you could do this if you went into a cave that was deep enough. But usually even in your house, there's not a single room in your house where some little bit of light won't find its way through, and that could be the light from the off button of your television going all the way from your living room into the bathroom and then under the door. Like it's amazing how sensitive your eyes get.
What about sound? Is that part of this too?
So that was a part of it too. So basically you have a room, has a shower, has a toilet, has their bed. I had a little yoga mat, and then I had a place where I could bring my food to eat. And then I had a window and a radiator. The radiator, it was winter there, so the radiator kept it warm, but to get fresh air, there was a window. And what you would do when you had to open the window is you would put on a mindfold blindfold, which for most of us psychonauts, we understand what a mindfold blindfold is. It's the best blindfold there is, which does a pretty impeccable job of blocking out all light. Sometimes there'll be just a little touch that'll come through the foam or something like that. So it's not, that's the only relief from the pure experience of darkness, is to be in the almost total darkness of having your mindfold on, when you're opening the window to get a little fresh air. Because the thing is, if you're blocking out all light, you're also blocking out circulation, unless you have some fancy circulator system in there. And then outside of my room was also a blacked out hallway where they would deliver food. And then when they would deliver the food, they would ring a bell. And that would let you know that you go back out into the blacked out hallway, fumble around, find your food, and figure out whatever it was. Usually stick your hands right in the food at the start.
There's other people in other rooms doing this at the same time
there
that you
are,
don't meet?
Yeah. You don't meet them, no.
Does anyone ever freak out and just be like, who's there? I need to know who's there.
I think so. Yeah, probably. That didn't happen when I was there. I was in a quadrant. The house was only half full. So my quadrant was actually empty for most of the time I was there. I think the first day there was somebody there.
Okay.
And then, and it's darkness and silence. And if you have some like request for food, you write it on a notepad. And you pull off the thing, and then you leave it where your food is. And it's hard to write in the darkness.
Yeah, you can't see what you're writing.
You can't see what you're writing. So, but they're pretty good at kind of figuring it out. And so like at some point I was like, no more tomatoes, please. You know, it's a raw vegan diet, you know, so like I'd write that on the note and then,
No nightshades in the dark. Thank you. Yeah.
exactly. And then one day I wrote like, more coconut oil in my smoothie, you know, like, so I would write little
Right.
notes and then that would translate into, reality at a later point. And you can ring a bell if you freak out and you need somebody help. They have like a 24-hour like intercom type of alarm system where if you push it, then like bells go off in the house and then someone attends to you. So like if you lose something or if you have like a water accident or you have like, something that happens, you can get help. But the idea
Okay.
is that it's darkness and silence. The
And
only
for
thing
how
to break
long was this though? This was
so
10
it was
days?
no, I was there for a total of like 9 days, but I was actually in the blackness for 6 full days. So that was the amount of time that I was in there. The only thing they gave us to break the silence was what they called an Om box. And they were from like the Indian Hindu spiritual tradition. And I guess they got in India these boxes that had no light. It was just a speaker with an on switch. And it would play Om on about a 15-second loop. So it was like a loop
Yeah.
of,
So they make those. Well, I have one here. It's like an old Indian box. Looks like it's kind of a Sputnik thing, and
yeah.
it just does like a raga tambur, boing, boing. That's what mine does. It just kind of makes like a thing to chant over, I guess.
Yep. And that's pretty much what this is, except it was Om.
That's so interesting to me. That's the only thing they give you.
That was the only
Of all
thing.
the things that could make sound, they give you a thing that does an electronic ohm.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious. They must be very intentional about that. It's like, why that?
I think because the having at least the variance of either silence or that is, I think, really helpful. Now, eventually the Om box makes you go crazy because it's like on loop. It's a very short loop. So like that becomes maddening. So you choose the maddening of your silence or like the maddening nature of having the Om box on. So you have like a preference between the two, but at least you have like the variance of those two notes.
All right. Here, I got a lot of questions. Let's just start at the beginning. Why did you do this? What made you think you needed to go to Germany and sit in the dark for 6 days?
I was called to it in a way that when I first did ayahuasca, I felt like I was really called to that medicine. Like I heard about it and I was like, I have to do this. And then for the most part, even when I met Don Howard, who's, the spiritual mentor I hold in highest regard, I wasn't particularly called to see him. I was just like, yeah, let me check this out. He's serving wachuma in a traditional way. Like, I'm curious. But it wasn't necessarily a calling that brought me to him the first time. So I haven't felt a calling like this since ayahuasca the first time. I literally just felt called. And I had some ideas in my mind that I knew that I would have to like grapple with my mind. And I knew that this would allow me, I was thinking it would allow me freedom from the anxiety that comes from the constant necessity to do things. So I thought it was going to be more like a release of doing. But it wasn't exactly what happened. I mean, there was some of that, but it was
meditation
far
is sort of that, but this is a whole nother level of it because you're taking away not just, you're taking away these senses and for such a long period of time. Look, I've heard that this is used as a form of torture, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but like it's a method they use to really fuck with people's heads when they're captives. So you screw up their circadian rhythms in a way. Now, I guess you could sleep when you wanted to, and I'm curious, like, did you start to have trouble, like, knowing, like, how long, like, did an hour pass? Did 5 minutes pass? How long did I sleep? I mean, talk about some of the rhythms of experience that came up. I'm not asking you, unless you want to kind of tell me takeaways, which we'll always take, but I'm just curious, like, what came up through these 6 days and what that experience is like, because I don't plan on doing this, but I'm curious what happens. Like what happens when,
Well, it comes in phases. So phase one is this kind of like, whoa, I'm like really here in the dark, and you're trying to figure stuff. Like before you get in the dark, you memorize the room, you put everything where you think you go, and then the darkness hits and you're like, oh shit, here I really am. And there's this kind of like figuring out the oh shit, here I am moment. And then that kind of carries you through the first day. When you start to like chew on some of the things that you've been thinking about. So it's a lot of like just thinking about what to do and thinking about all the things that more contemplation at that point. And that's kind of the flavor of the first day. But it was actually pretty easy to sleep the first night. And they vary the times that they serve you the food, but they don't vary it by that much. They're not serving you food in the middle of the night, because they're sleeping and they're doing it.
Is it 3 times a day?
3 meals. Yeah. So you hear the bell 3 times for food. So
were you hungry? Like, was it enough food?
It was definitely a cleanse of sorts. Again, it's raw vegan. It's a smaller amount of food. And I was probably one of the bigger sized humans that went in there that's used to a higher protein diet. But I just considered it kind of a cleanse. And I actually appreciated the fact that it was raw vegan. There's a couple reasons. One is that if the food was so tantalizingly delicious that I would just be waiting at the door like Pavlov's dog, like ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell. I can't wait. So the food was bland enough and just nutritious enough that it became just a function of here I am nourishing my body and grateful to be nourishing my body. But it wasn't something that was like such a desire to eat. So if I was in a good meditative phase, I would leave my food out on the counter for maybe 2 hours past the bell or however long it was. But there was a regular cadence sometime in the breakfast period, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. roughly. Breakfast would be served, and then noon to 3 p.m. would roughly be lunch, and then 6 to 9 would roughly be dinner. And they would switch it around intentionally so you didn't know exactly, but there was enough of a cadence that you got to kind of figure it out. So anyway, first day is just thinking and contemplation, and actually sleep was pretty good because the body starts to produce a lot of melatonin when you remove all of the blue lights and all lights. The body starts flooding you with melatonin, which is an essential.
A lot of dreams too, then probably.
Yep. So the dreams started to come, and some really interesting dreams. And then day 2, I slept pretty good, and I started to figure out some of the things like the practices that I was going to do. Like, all right, every day I'm going to take a cold shower. I'm going to stretch. I brought a little lacrosse ball to roll out on, and I'm going to do, I had these mala beads. I'm going to do kind of this self-love mantra, like through all the beads. I'm going to have different meditations that I'm going to do. And I kind of started to get this regimen, but
structure.
There's a little bit of structure, a little bit of things that I knew that I could lean on. And then this breath practice that I was going to do every day. So it's kind of starting to figure that out. But the intensity of the machinations of my mind were also ramping up. So it started to become unpleasant with the amount of thinking that I was doing. Like I just
so
was
exposed, I would presume. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to distract you. So you just go deeper and deeper into the thoughts and deeper into the anxieties that are underlying the thoughts and the forces that are pushing you into the thoughts. And then make it through that day. That day wasn't particularly the hardest, but I started to feel the pressure of the darkness that it was pushing on my thoughts, and then kept trying to I'm just watching my thoughts here. And I would catch myself and I'm like, what are you doing, man? And I actually had a voice of one of my friends, actually Mike Posner, oddly enough, who I just spent some time with in Poland. And I would have his voice just come in my head, and I would hear him when I'd be stuck in this thing, like, what am I going to do? I got to do this. And he'd be like, bro, honestly, it's not that important. I would laugh, and I'd be like, yeah, you're right. But I actually came up in that first few days, I had so many ideas about what I was going to do. I was like, I figured it out. I know what I'm going to do now. I've thought about it enough. Like, I got to do this. And it was like wild shit. I was like, I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to do this. It was so much about what I was going to do externally to try and solve the problems that were internal. And
You're going to get a darkness tattoo. It's like the ayahuasca tattoo.
Exactly,
Just
man.
like a big shadow coming down your chest. Yeah.
It was all of these things about what I was going to do. Then the interesting thing was day 3 hit. And day 3, which is a little bit earlier for most, day 3, the visions started to come. And
visions.
You hear about this. And, so from a clinical perspective, they haven't proven the endogenous production of DMT in the human brain.
Right.
Because that would necessitate a vivisection of a brain when it was creating those molecules and fitting those molecules into the receptors. I don't think there's another way to do it. So it's unproven. They have some preliminary research in rats where they vivisected rats' brains. And so they kind of get it. But in mystical traditions, they understand it. And when you go to the darkness retreat, it's just like they've they've done this for 10 years. They know that people have visions. So all the visions that are happening, it's like, yeah, of course. We've been talking about this in our spiritual traditions for 3,000 years. You go into the cave, you start to have visions, and we get it, and it's DMT. And
Wow.
they just understand that. But I was curious, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, I've done a shitload of DMT. I've done ayahuasca a bunch of times. I've done Vilca. I've done 5-MeO. I've done NN-DMT from the acacia. I've done all of the and mimosa. I've done all the different forms of DMT that I've had available, but not endogenously, obviously. So for whatever reason, maybe because my receptors were primed from all of my medicine work, I start getting visions on day 3. And it was interesting because first thing that you see is like a light that's flashing and coming into your eye, like your lights flash. There's like lights flashing. And I was like, that's fucking interesting. And so these flashing lights start to come. And then behind the flashing lights are what I would call, off-peak DMT or ayahuasca level visions. So it's the same idea. It's this kind of moving, amalgamous, fractal patterns
Really?
that you start to see. And it started off kind of subtle. And that third night was a hard night of sleep. But because I'm still wrestling with my mind, I'm very much in my mind, but I'm starting to open the pathway to these visions. But then by day 4, the visions were fucking strong. And I was like, holy shit, this is an ayahuasca ceremony that is not going to end and appears to be escalating.
Does it matter if your eyes are closed or not?
Doesn't matter. You can't
For the
change
visions.
the channel.
So you can't escape it.
No. So here's the way. The only way I realized that I could change the channel of my visions, because eyes closed, eyes open. Usually in a trip, even a mushroom trip or an ayahuasca trip, you can open your eyes and it will change the nature of your vision. So if you're seeing some horrible shit, and trust me, I was seeing plenty of horrible shit, like wheat threshers rolling over people's bodies and like all of these things, which are the invitation to love everything as it is, both the Kali side, if we're going to go for the Hindu, kind of representation, that Kali side of the wild, the necklace of the severed arms and the babies' heads and all of this, the dark, that element of what we would traditionally call dark. And I'm not referring to the light, but like the dark imagery. And it was very much like that. I was like, fuck. Like, this is a lot, but I've done enough medicine work where I was just sitting with it and practicing my best to love that and to not have preference towards the celestial visions, which I certainly do prefer than seeing the dark ones. But you learn to practice like the non-attachment
to just
what
move,
you see.
with the river. Yeah,
Exactly.
Continue through.
Exactly. So those started to come, and those visions were particularly challenging, interspersed by an occasional, and at that point, day 4, interspersed by occasional, like, beautiful visions and surprising ones. Like, one vision I had was an appearance of Buddha, which I've never seen before. Never even felt that strong a connection with Buddha as like a teacher or an ascended master. I mean, I'm sure I have little Buddhas in my house, but it's more like a decorative representation with reverence, of course. But I've never really connected to the Buddha as a being. Anyways, Buddha shows up in radiant gold and is just smiling, just beaming with the greatest happiness and this huge smile. And I'm taken aback and I say, Buddha, why are you smiling? And Buddha looks at me and goes, why aren't you smiling? I go, oh. And then Buddha starts laughing. And I go, Buddha, why are you laughing? And Buddha goes, why aren't you laughing? And I was like, oh yeah. Okay. And then we just like looked at, there's nothing more to say at that point. I didn't have anything to say. I was like, yeah, that's it. Why am I not smiling? Why am I not laughing? And then, that image went away. So there was those classic kind of ayahuasca level encounters where like a being comes and you see that being. And then there was also the other kind of normal fractal patterns, just things moving in geometric shapes and these kind of golf balls that had sprouts coming out and earth coming out and flotillas and different.
Let me ask you this.
things.
So if you're having these visions, though, like on a psychedelic experience, there's often that other layer of the ego itself breaking down or time distorting the things that, like, this sounds like, because in a sense you are sober, you should have sense of an awareness of yourself as Aubrey. at witnessing these things. So it's sort of an
Yes,
interesting, like, that seems unique. It's like you're having these
it is.
intense
Yeah.
visions, but you're also just sort of here, right? You're
It was
not
super
having
unique.
all maybe the, yeah, like, so tell me about, like, was there a body response, or was, on that level, or was there sort of,
Nope.
was this all just visual in a way? It's
All
all about the
visual.
sight.
That
That's
was what
wild.
was really fucking weird. And the other thing that was absent is, if you're on mushrooms, you feel mushrooms as an entity, as a presence. Like you feel like you got mushrooms, like your older brother or a grandfather or some kind of energy, and all those are anthropomorphizations, obviously, of an archetype, but you feel like there's a guide. They say Mother Ayahuasca or like the
Yeah.
only those, like these allies that are kind of guiding you
Yeah.
through the journey. There's the absence of that. There's no guide. And there's no somatic experience. There's just the visual opening of this field where you're in this place where your body feels exactly the same as it normally would, except you have these flashing lights and these visions that are appearing, which is like, it's a very strange and pure expression of the visionary state that I've never experienced before.
I don't know. It's really, really wild to me because I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, of course, the contrarian response would be like, well, yeah, you go into a space and you turn off the lights and your brain's going to start you're going to have all these visions coming from your brain. But I'm kind of looking at it from the response of like sort of yes and. It's like yes, but it's sort of like the antenna that is the receptor for all of, that's one way of looking at consciousness. Like you are this antenna. And maybe on certain psychedelics, you're tuning to different frequencies or amplifying what you can pull in. And you're doing that in this sense, but it's sort of like, what does it mean when you're able to be attuned to a wider frequency spectrum of consciousness, of energy, of life source, yet there's not always another entity there, like you said, like the guide. And sometimes it sounds like people drop in because you're in the, you're on the highway, you're in the river, surfing all this stuff. But if you can't turn it off, like, did that just go on for days?
It went on
for the last 3 days.
For the last 3 days, it was this escalating journey. So again, I think I tried to mention it. The one way that you could change the visual channel is if you push on the top of your eyelids. You can do this even now, even when you're not exposed. But if you push on the top of your eyelids and put ocular pressure on your eyes, you'll see different little patterns of light that'll kind of shift in your closed eyes, right? So when you're doing that in the darkness, it's actually amplified. So it'll come into this kind of really like bright kind of more geometric, not necessarily fractal pattern. And so like, if I really was like, I just need a fucking break, from seeing the same like DMT tryptamine laden visions, I would push on my eyes and I'd be like, okay, this is different. And then, but it comes right back. It doesn't last for very long. So I could get like a 30-second or a 1-minute break by pushing on my eyelids. But so anyway, so I'm in this space, just tuned in for a long time. And the beauty of that was that I started to really learn. I started to like really learn from the space and take away like some interesting things. So I had a couple other like really powerful visions. My father started hearing voices that, about 8 years ago, and he's gone insane, and I haven't been able to speak with him. Nobody in our family really has for the last 8 years. And I see a vision of my dad in the corner of the room, like just there in the corner of the room. And he's in a recline, like a reading chair. And he's got a little nightstand, and the nightstand has a lamp, and he's reading a book. And I go, "Hey, Dad, what you reading?" And he says, "The Book of Lies." I said, "Why are you reading the Book of Lies, Dad?" He says, "Well, the Book of Lies tells me I'm a monarch. It tells me I'm a savior. It tells me I'm all of these great things." And then he closes the book, and he looks at me and he goes, "Son, like, always know." He's like, "I'm reading." He's like, he tells me all that. And I think I maybe said, "Why again?" And he said, "Well, because I never thought that I was enough. And I was never enough being just who I was. I was never enough being Michael Marcus. I was never enough being the man that I was. So I needed to turn to the Book of Lies to read something that made me worthy of love." And he closes the book and he throws it over his shoulder. And he goes, "Son, know that no matter what, that you're enough. Know that no matter what, you're worthy of love. and that you never need to read the Book of Lies because who you are is absolutely as beautiful as any of the things that the Book of Lies would tell you. And I was like,
Yeah, gives me
fuck.
chills.
I was like, fuck. Like, thanks, Dad. And we had like a little bit of an interaction after that. And I remember telling him, I was like, Dad, like, know that what you did was perfect. It was perfect because here I am. Like,
right. It's like the roles he's playing in his incarnation as a gift to you too, as a major part of perhaps his whole being.
Exactly.
I mean, what an amazing sense of gratitude you can have when we look at, that's just our parents alone, when we sit there and judge them, which is sort of what we're supposed to do as we develop. But then to have a new eyes on it as the gift maybe they're giving with their just the act of their entire incarnation, so that you can bounce off of that and reflect off of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, what a payoff for that moment, and not to say that is worth it or I wanted that or anything, but like in a way that was this full circle moment where I've gotten to see what my own neuroses, which is my own beliefs of not being enough, my need to do more, my need to be this or that to be worthy of love, like the logical conclusion of my own neuroses, if I engaged that path for a lifetime and never actually surrendered to loving myself as I am, then you come up, the ego comes up with a solution. And the solution is, in that case, turning to the Book of Lies, turning to a voice that would tell you something that would make you love yourself, because the state of not loving yourself is intolerable. So it was like me actually getting to see this in a way of like, oh, wow, like this is the conclusion of a lifetime lived in the denial of the love of you as you are. So it's just wild.
Ironically, I mean, that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And what I hear from that is also that part of what led you to do this in the first place was your own sense of something not being enough. Like there was a seeking there, and that's a lot about your drive as a person. Totally. I mean, did that? How does that feel now? Like, because you're a very, very driven person. I mean, I believe before this trip you were spending time with Wim Hof, which is another sort of extreme experience, and you're always kind of looking for the edges, and you're one of these guys who's the putting on the spacesuit and doing the work for people like me, so I can sit here and ask you, so what's it like out there? Like what happens when you sit in the dark for 6 days? Now I have a little bit of insight, but how does that feel? Is it different for you, your sense of drive?
It's I've had to reflect on that a lot, because it's interesting to be in the world where you play chess in a certain way. You play chess when you record a podcast, and how you release the podcast, and how you cut the podcast, and how you, even if you're expressing the truth, you're still delivering it in a way that the most people are going to be listening to it. So there's this urge to divorce yourself from all strategy, and just be like, no, like whatever I'm doing is enough. All I want to do is be. All I want to do is be. But then you go back to the world of doing, and the tension is, well, I want to help people see how I'm being so that I can share what I'm doing.
They're kind of polarities, right?
It's a different, it's an interesting.
Purposely so, yeah.
It's an interesting.
There's an engine there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I haven't completely reconciled that, because I think really the reconciliation comes from the awareness, basically, just like the awareness of like, okay, this is a strategy. I'm posting at 3 p.m. instead of posting at the middle of the night because it's going to reach more people. Like it's okay. And it's okay to do that. It's like, this isn't me being manipulative or necessary. And maybe it is actually. And if I am, then it's to be aware of that and be okay with that and say like, look, I'm human. Like I want this post to reach a lot of people, and I want to feel that feeling. So I think it's more just about awareness of it than anything, but it definitely has shifted my level of awareness radically, because now I'm like aware of when I'm playing chess rather than blindly playing chess, because I need to feed something that's in my subconscious or my unconscious, which is a desire for validation. It's like, okay, no, I'm playing chess right now. That's cool. And that's what humans do. And that's what I'm going to do. I run a business. I'm trying to get my podcast out there. I'm doing stuff. It's okay that I'm playing this game, but at least I'm aware that I'm playing the game.
And it's like when the map becomes the territory, or when we know it's a game, but it's when we're lost in the game, which I honestly think, I think about this a lot and I talk about it a lot because it is, it's at the really the spear tip in the forefront of people who are doing any kind of work to kind of help bring in this new story of being that is emerging. And we're all sort of singing about it and talking about it in our own ways. Doing that inside the system that is trying to change. And there's no other way to do it. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like we're using the tools we're trying to replace. But that's how we have to do it. And that's complicated. And so for myself personally, the task is how do I not, well, on a base level, it's like, how do I not make things worse by putting people more asleep and that's going to happen by me being lost in the game. Like but every day you're on this razor wire of like, wait a minute. Okay. There's the truth, but here's me. Inevitably I have to use these tools and I don't want accident. I want to build the house, not hit my thumb with the hammer or hit someone over the head. And that is a tricky thing because you want to have some fun with it too. Like you said, we're humans. We're meant to have fun with it. We're meant to play. Yeah. And Maya is a form of play. And so there is no answer to it because it's a continual process. Like you said, when we're doing podcasts or we're talking or anything, you're in your mind, there's right now is that dance of like, how authentic can I be, but also not be boring, right? Yeah. Or have dead air or whatever it is. It's like, and that's, I guess, the skill.
Me and you decided to just sit and look at each other. That might be a lovely
just eye gaze. Yeah.
You, but it would not be a lovely experience for our dear listeners, you know? So yeah, it is. It's a dance, but I think play is exactly the right word. And in my own other former encounters with the divine, I think I can remember one encounter with the divine where I asked a very similar question, like, how do you embody the aspect of the divine, which is complete release of attachment, you know? And I started to understand, I had my own way that I define the divine in the darkness I called it the loving aperspectival witness of all.
So non-perspective loving witness.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So like if you become the witness of the witness of the witness, and it's the loving aperspective. It has no perspective. It's, as Hermes Trismegistus says, it's the infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere, right? It's like there's no perspective because it's all perspectives. So like in that place, I was asking like, well, how do we embody the divine in the human form? And the divine in that day had a sense of humor and just kind of said, you do your best. You know, like it's not meant to be perfected, you know, like it's meant to be just played with and recognized, and it's not possible. We're in a body, we're in multiple dimensions that do have perspectives, and the ability to completely shed that perspective is maybe the long journey home that we're all on. But for now, we're in the world of perspective. And so once we're in the world of perspective, we have to play in those lokas, in those planes of existence. And but I think play is the absolute key word. That was the teaching that Buddha gave. Like, you know, I'm all fucking flustered thinking about all these things. It's like Buddha comes in beaming with a smile. I'm like, why aren't you smiling?
Why aren't you smiling? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and that's I think the big key.
Well, you know, the word darkness, in a sense, like when I started this and I said you went into the darkness, or you spent time in darkness, I would assume most of our brains went to negativity. Like you went into the dark parts of your psyche, the shadow. And I've had some experiences where I would realize the darkness actually being sort of like the primordial womb, like the ultimate warmth or the place of all creation, as opposed to what we normally think of like light versus dark.
Sure.
Did you have any insights or feelings about what darkness, like the fertileness of it?
Yeah, it's the darkness and the light. I realized, like, if you imagine the most blistering white light, it's blinding. You see nothing. And if you're imagining the most penetrating, like impenetrable, impermeable darkness, absolute cloaking black, you see nothing. It's the same thing, right? It's the all. It's just different. It's just different ways to look at the one. You can look at the one through all the light. You can look at the one through the absence of light, but you start to lose the distinction, you know? And so the blackness is the all. It's the divine. It's not we always try to think like, oh yeah, the divine is the light. Sure, if you want. But the divine is the dark. Sure, if you want. What it isn't is it isn't the contrast that comes. I mean, yes, it is. But if you're talking about the one itself purely, like it's not the contrast, it's not the colors, it's not browns and purples and greens and all of these different things, because that's a perspective. That's the blending. That's polarity. And this is like the one is the place beyond polarity, the entity beyond polarity, with force beyond polarity, whatever your language wants. But so the light and the darkness are really the same. And I think in some ways, I think people of being afraid of the darkness, yes, maybe there's practical reasons. There was predators in the darkness, or people rob houses in the dark or whatever. But I think in some ways people are afraid of that encounter with divinity, and that's, I think, inherently in this darkness, like what is there for us in the darkness. And I think that's something to really take a look at, because the darkness was absolutely rich and full, like as full, it was a plenum, like it was just full of everything. And the longer I stayed in there, the more full it was. I mean, it was interesting because you think you would miss sight, but I didn't miss sight because I was seeing so much.
Right.
Out of the point by day 5, I'm eating my food. And as I would eat my food, I would see like sprouts and carrots and like things like bursting in my third eye. I would go take a shower and I would soap up my hands and I would see bubbles coming up in my third eye. And then in like really clear ways, I would wipe my ass and I would see shit. And I'd be like, there was like not things that I couldn't see. I could see the faces of the ones I love and see them talking to me. And I could see beautiful landscapes and these celestial gardens and you start to see things. And so you don't necessarily miss the sight because you have that. I mean, in some ways you do, you miss the ordinary world. But here's where it really broke me. I'll tell you where the darkness broke me.
Okay.
The darkness broke me when I recognized, and this happened, my mom, I've been very fortunate in that my mother has been probably the closest approximation of unconditional love of any human being I've ever encountered. And I encountered her in the darkness, and she came and she just expressed her love to me. Like, I love you so much, and I've always loved you, and I always will. And I felt it, like go deep, like through all the layers. And I recognized like, fuck, like I've never really let that love all the way in. I've never let it all the way in. And you know what else? I haven't let in all my love for my life. I haven't really let myself love my life and
Just
really
kind of letting that love through. Yeah. How does it transmute out? What ways can you love unconditionally?
I haven't. And the reason why is not simple, but it's this form of cowardice, because I was afraid that if I let myself feel that love and it went away, then I would be too hurt. So if I let myself feel how much love that was there for my mother and my mother died, well, then I would be too crushed. If I let myself feel how much I love my life and I died, then it would be too devastating. I would be too afraid of death to even go on. If I let myself realize how amazing it is to be me in my life, in this body, and with everything I have. So I numbed it. I numbed it all down. So it's like, yeah, if I die, I die. I go off to the astral, whatever. Oh yeah, if my mom dies, no one ever really dies. It's just a ceremony. It's just a transition, blah, blah, blah. So you use all these excuses. But really, it was, the truth of the matter is that I'd layered up enough armor so that I never really felt love fully. I never really felt happiness fully. I never felt it except for brief moments where I would burst through with medicines or with just random experiences or with laughter or with some other thing where I'd burst through, but I'd always close back up. And so when that burst me open, and then, I mean, it was an absolute emotional outpouring, feeling that love and recognizing how much I love my life. And I was just sobbing, saying like, I love my life. I love my life. Like, I love my family. I love my friends. I love everything. Then at that point, that's when the darkness broke me, because at that point I was like, I want to go. I want to get the fuck out of here.
I want to
Like,
be in my life.
I
Yeah.
want to be in my life. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to have no sounds. I want to listen to fucking music. Like I want to listen to music. I want to hug my friends. And what if something happened to somebody while I was here in the dark and I never got to like love them
Yeah.
in the way that I feel
Yeah.
right now? And so all of these things started to come. And that was the hardest day. That was the last day. So that was day 5. I got out on day 6. But that was the hardest day. And it took the darkness kind of putting me back together in a way and like bringing me forward into the love of my life before it became so difficult to stay in there.
So it's almost like you're saying the darkness brought a deeper level of vulnerability for you to accept that which you have or that which
Yeah.
exists in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me. It's probably hard for a lot of people to impermanence. And when you fully grok it, you want to hold on to things and maybe you can't. So you try to protect yourself by perhaps not fully embodying the experience.
Yeah.
There's a tragedy to that, right?
There
Because
is.
there only is the experience. Why not fully accept it, even though pain is part of the experience? You can't protect yourself from that. I guess numbing, like you said, trying to numb yourself up is the only approach, but maybe it's a temporary anesthesia.
And it's the most foolish anesthesia possible because while it may be hard to let things go, the real horror of horrors is to have gone through your life with the opportunity to feel it and love it and not having taken that opportunity. Like that is the essential horror. So like we just have it backwards. We're numbing ourselves for a very small pain at the cost of the great tragedy, which would be to not love your life. And that's the ultimate reframe that you have. Now, the fucked up part and the hard part is that you have these experiences. I guess you would call it like in some ways this was an extended satori, like this immersion, just like a psychedelic journey where you touch something and you feel it and you feel the experience of this, and then you travel back to the ordinary world, and already I can feel and become aware of the same protection mechanisms layering back on, just like
Well, it's a familiar pathway. Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It's familiar to be that. The difference being is that I have a greater level of awareness, and I think I'm more capable with that awareness of actually trying to untangle the knots. But it's not like I think you always have the hope that that you go through an experience like this. Maybe it's a great mushroom journey, or maybe it's a great, it's this great experience in the darkness. You hope you just come out and you're a new person, and it's from there forward. I loved my life. That was the point,
Yeah.
But it's a practice. It's like a gradual process of like awakening to the truth that you know to be true.
But there's no destination, Aubrey. And I mean, it's a process of experience, and you have had this experience, and it cannot not inform your walk now.
True.
And like you said, I mean, what we're grasping for is sort of like, well, then I've arrived somewhere. I won't experience the things that caused me certain kinds of pain, but there's a witnessing of it now that you didn't have. There's a certain perspective that you didn't have. And so, I mean, maybe the gift is just being able to sit in a different seat and watch that show go by. Mm-hmm. The show's going to go by still. I mean, it's certainly, look, on there's just the level of the gift you're giving by sharing the story and how that will reverberate in someone else's psyche is beautiful. That's a form of that unconditional love from your mother flowing through you, and then you give it out to someone else. That's it right there.
Yeah.
And it's, again, not something like you create this thing and you can put it out and that's like, I finally hit the spot.
Yeah.
It sort of like happens in multitude. The unconditioned is that it's across time, like it's without time. It's here, it's there. It's it sounds to me like in the great spectrum of your psychedelic experience, this one was quite valuable.
I would say the most, to be honest, and I've done so many that have been so impactful, and the duration is the interesting thing, because it's like, it's a baptism that stays a little bit longer. So the longest psychedelic journey I'd done prior was Iboga, which lasts 18 hours. And that had a pretty significant impact because of the sheer length and the sheer volume. It's also very intense,
Very physical.
very uncomfortable, very fucking uncomfortable. But the length of it was special because you're in it for so fucking long, you know? And I think the darkness was, you know, it had its own neutrality. It had its own flavors and stuff. But I think it's really the immersion in it. And then that kind of staying in that space that made it such a powerful experience, because it wasn't quite the same as like peak psilocybin or peak ayahuasca. It never reached quite that level, but nonetheless staying with it for that long,
you can work with it too.
You can really work with it and really like learn from it. I started to learn how to translate things. Like, so I would see things, and the things I started to see in kind of like a fractal one color way. Like, I'm smart enough now that if I saw a white bull come and I could see the bull's eyes and I could like see his whiskers and it was like a 3D bull, I would be like, hey, bull, what's up? Like, I've been in enough journeys to know that animals might want to talk to me. You know, of course, that I'm going to fucking talk to the animal. But if
they might want to talk.
I just saw the shapes of bulls. And I was like, well, that doesn't mean anything. That's just my mind. This is just patterns. I'm just seeing patterns. So I didn't have the awareness that maybe those patterns were actually somebody or something or some way that my mind needed to communicate an idea or explore an idea. So anyways, the example of this one is a funny one because I was intentionally communicating with a lot of the people I'm close with, which seemed like the door had already been mutually opened, so it was easy to communicate. But there's people and things that I didn't really want to engage with. So I wasn't opening my door. So I kept seeing all these bulls and I was like, I don't know what the fuck the deal is with these bulls are. And something that the retreat director, Bharati, said is just like, just be aware. Because at one point we did communicate at like day 4. She brought me down she asked me if I wanted to go down to their singing. They do this like Hindu chanting and singing. And she invited me down. So we talked a little bit. With the mindfold on, we talked a little bit about that. And she's like, just know that everything is communication. So I sat with that, kept seeing the bulls. Finally, I'm like, okay, fuck it. Even though this is 1D shape of a bull, all I see is the horns, you know, like, and everything. I was like, maybe the bull has something to say to me. And I say, bull, like, are you something? Do you want to say anything? And then it goes, brrr, and it comes through. And my ex-partner, who I'm still very close with, Whitney, it was her boyfriend. Ricky. And I'm like, Ricky, you got to be fucking kidding me. like there's no, and he's like, hey mate, like really happy to be talking to you here. You know, like I've been having these things going on and, I've just been blah, blah. And he goes into this whole story and I'm like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. I'm talking to, not that I don't like him. He's a really sweet guy, but like it was the last.
I mean, you were talking to the Buddha for a minute there and then, and then Ricky swims in. You're like, wait, what? Hey, what's up, Ricky? What are you doing here?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what is going on? So we end up having this conversation. I texted him about the conversation we had at the end of it. And he was like, wow, man, that's like spot on. Like, thanks so much for sharing. But what's interesting, as soon as I asked the bulls and I had that conversation with Ricky, the bulls went away. Like that pattern was out of my field. Huh. And then so I started to go through and there was this like parrotfish looking thing that was my friend Liv. And then there was these fucking spaceships that were like these alien beings that wanted to talk to me. And there was this flower that represented an ex that I had. And then there was this like, and it was like all of these things that were just like, I just considered the fractal patterns of being in the DMT space were actually like people like things knocking on the door, either of my own imagination or like a communication. So that was a really cool experience to learn like, oh, if I really look deeper, like all of these things might be something trying to communicate.
And the role of your invitation for it to open the doorway of that communication, that's spoken a lot in various traditions or methods. It's like you have to have that invitation and to be careful of what you are inviting in, because that's how it works. It's like you have to kind of open the doorway in a sense, and then it's like, okay, great, thank you, finally. You know, we can't get in without that. That's a pretty powerful lesson in itself.
It was. And interestingly, there was other times where I would try to talk to someone who didn't want to talk to me. And like I would try to open the door, I would try to pry the door open. And the
Uh-huh.
encounter was always like, hey, fuck off. You know, like I don't fucking get the fuck out of here. Like I have nothing to fucking say to you, you know? And like so it was interesting, like if you try to like force that and it's not something that's in accord, it never really worked, you know? And I think that would have been the same if with those other entities, if they tried to force their way in, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. But the fact that I was like, okay, bull, like, who are you? And then it was like, hey, it's Ricky, you know, like, I was like, well, I opened the door so that we could have the communication. But I think there is this kind of, if you're, it's just like, I guess, part of the astral rules. I don't, I don't know, but you start to learn
Yeah.
stuff. And I wouldn't have learned that if it was a 4-hour journey or a 5-hour journey, because I wouldn't have had just the time and the patience of, you know, I was only sleeping 3-4 hours a day because I had my aura ring on. So eventually it tracked and I got to see I was sleeping like 3-4 hours a day. So I was in vision for 20, 21 hours out of the day. So you start to get real curious.
Wow. Well, just last few questions. So I'm curious, when you came out of this, how quickly, like how do you come out of it, and how quickly did you kind of work your way into regular light and consciousness? How did this fade?
Well, so they walked me outside, and the first part is you have your blindfold, and it was sunset, and I just took my blindfold off and let the sun hit my eyes, and then I looked out over the Black Forest and this kind of pastoral landscape, and I just one of the deepest emotional outbursts I've ever felt. Seeing the world, like, you know, there's a saying from Christ, "Behold, I make all things new," and it was like I'd reached a
Rebirth.
state of love, and I looked at everything, and it was so beautiful. And it was also the beauty of what I was seeing, but also the sorrow of having not seen it for so
Mm.
long. And that just overwhelmed me. And I cried for like 20 minutes. And it was, you know, the light is really hard. So you're kind of squinting and taking in as much as you can. And then, you know, eventually I sat outside for as long as I could. And then it got dark and cold. And then I went back to the room and lit a candle and just kind of like stayed there with the candle, looking at the fire and thinking. And then eventually I could just feel my phone beckoning. And I was like, I got to take this fucking slow, you
The
know?
explosion.
Yeah, I got to take this slow. So, fortunately, it was on like airplane mode. So I switched from, you know, I didn't get all my texts flooding through or anything like that. So the first thing I did was actually put on your Ram Dass album. And I was like, music. Oh, fuck.
Yeah, it's cool. It's interesting, like a different sense to kind of buffer in between
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
And then I went to dinner and, you know, had food that I could see for the first time. And that was lovely. And, you know, you're still like a little disoriented, and things that move fast kind of make you dizzy. And, you know, your eyes take a little while to adjust. And then eventually the anxiety of what was waiting for me on my phone was outweighing my, you know, my
God, it
like,
must have been a lot, man. You're a busy guy. I mean, that
yeah.
must have been.
So it was, even though people knew, I knew there was a lot that was going to come through. So I just clicked that button that same night, simply because I was so anxious about it. I was like, I just got to get this over with. Like I mean, I could try to hold this off. There's nothing I have to do, but the anxiety of thinking about it and being able to do it was too much. So I clicked that off and got a lot of message. Fortunately, all the messages coming through were loving messages. And I kind of hit my mom up and let her know how much I loved her.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
That was the
Okay,
first
good.
message I sent.
Good. Good.
And then, you know, sent one message to the group, like letting them know, like, hey, I'm out. I'm great. I love you. I'm not going to be on my phone for a little bit. And then, you know, spent that night and the next day kind of just sitting with it, playing with the candle, leaving the candle on, listening to music. But honestly, that next day, everything was really overwhelming. Like everything was really overwhelming. I felt like just a peeled potato, where like all my skin was off and everything seemed like too much.
Yeah. So raw.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
vulnerable.
it was, I really was. And that was challenging. You know, I started traveling the next day, and, you know, there's a lot of anxiety, just dealing with normal life and like all of the normal protective mechanisms that make things smooth and make me confident to like kind of push through all these things. So much of that was stripped away. I would burst into tears randomly, like even like watching a show or seeing something and just seeing like a glimpse of the beauty of humanity. I would just start sobbing and be like, I love humans, like humans are amazing. And then different periods. And I think eventually that rawness stayed for so long. And the flavor of that rawness was, as I crashed back into reality, was anxiety. Like it was like so overwhelming that I think that's what facilitated me putting my armor back on. I had some beautiful encounters where, because the armor was like half on, and a lot of like really nurturing, beautiful encounters, but also a lot of stress. And I think, so then eventually I put enough armor back on. I had a few nights where I drank some wine and was like, look, let's just fucking get back to like,
relax a little bit. Yeah.
a little bit, I need ceremony to be over for a minute, and then throughout this past week, it's been a nice process of getting back to the breath work, getting back to things where I'm just more comfortable making the armor permeable. So it's not like a binary off on. It's more like permeable where I can exist with it, and I can also kind of melt it back a little bit. So I'm starting to have like a little bit more agency with that, which feels good.
Well, I can sense it. I can feel the permeable, malleable nature of whatever it is, your consciousness you're working through. So it doesn't feel like, I definitely feel like some of this beautiful darkness coming through in the form of it's a sweetness to it. And we always say like, oh, I can feel the light from you. I can feel the darkness from you. Beautiful, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's like, what a gift to give us that time. And it was fascinating for me as well.
Yeah. I want to do other stuff in the dark now too. That was another idea I had. Like, I want to have sex in the dark, like in the pitch dark.
Yeah. Real dark. Yeah.
Like not like just lights off, because you can still see.
To create it at your house, a dark room.
A dark room, and that's like part of the intention is, I don't have to do the long stays where the melatonin converts into DMT or whatever the fuck happens that creates the visions, but just to go in there and experience some things, because the meditations were easier, they went deeper, and it's so nice not to have a blindfold, to be like really no sensation around the eyes. You're just free to be in the darkness. So meditations are interesting, like talking to people. I think would be fucking lovely to be in the dark, just to sit.
Well, I mean, I often do podcasts with just audio, but it's helpful, like right now, to have body language of sorts. But at the same time, there's something to be said for listening like that. And there's forms where, like, I've seen those dinners that you go to in the dark, where that's something, and all the servers and waiters are blind people. But you have no sight to go in the dinner, and it's sort of like to enjoy the food more and so forth. And I'm sure you've heard about the kids that are brought up. I don't remember the tribe or the group, and they don't have any light until, I don't know, 13 or something. And those are the ones they find to be receptive, to be like the shamans of their group. And so there's definitely something there as to like what it can cultivate and awaken other parts of your psyche and your mind. And maybe, as you're experienced, the visions that it allows to come through, because something else isn't there's a kind of noise that is not there anymore. And so the antenna can pick up something else more clearly.
No doubt.
It's amazing. You're a crazy man. I love it. I sent you some light and love and a few moments when you were in there, because I was like, oh, he's in it right now.
I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah. Rada did as well. And so thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, my man. So much love to you, brother.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, for coming on the show. He's someone that as soon as I met him, we met doing a video chat, actually. And the first time we were talking, I was like, oh, I click with this guy. This is, sometimes things just flow. Aubrey's in the flow. And maybe we've just known each other before or something along those lines. But really fun to dive into that experience. And thank you, Aubrey. Check out On It and check out his wonderful podcast when you get a chance. This song that you were hearing in the background is called Tillage, and it is from Music for Mushrooms, a soundtrack for the psychedelic practitioner. That is my 5-hour album that is designed for just what it says. guiding a psychedelic therapeutic mushroom journey. Now, of course, you could use this music for anything you like. You could use it for studying, for making babies, for maybe other psychedelic work, as I've heard people do. It just happened to be designed for the psilocybin journey, and it's a 5-hour, fully connected, fully researched through 10 years of our own anecdotal research as what works to guide someone through a ceremony. And I talk about that a lot in other podcasts. I won't go too much into it now. Thanks again for giving this podcast a review, for sharing it on social media and telling your friends and helping it grow, because we're just trying to put forth a new story into the land, the great land of the human experience, saying we can do this, we can do it better, it can be more beautiful, and you are needed. Thanks so much for listening. You keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.